Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder and we're going to be talking about ships. If you're looking for the KV-220 or the whatever it is, the F7, F3 I believe, they'll be coming later in the week. But basically, the reason I haven't got them yet is because I had to take a few days off because I had a business trip, so that's always nice. The big thing that has hit us from Gamescom, which is the large gathering of games companies that kind of just show their products. It happened last year as well with Gaijin, and I believe they showed American tanks. Maybe it may have been even before that, but I believe it was there was something to do with ground vehicles because they brought tanks there. I believe they brought some kind of SU, maybe the 85 or the 100, and they brought another tank, and it was very interesting. This time they brought a boat, so it was pretty obvious what they were going on. They were going to show the new ships, which they have talked about before in Q&As. They've said that they're looking for closed beta testing by the end of the year, and that makes sense because in ground forces you had kind of the same thing. The closed beta testing started at the end of a year. Was it last year or the year before? I believe it was the year before. And from there, when it gets to January, February, March, something like that, so then it goes into open beta, and they give you chances to get in it, whether it be buying a pack or doing challenges and stuff like that. So right now, you have opportunities to get into the closed beta. You can buy either of the packs. With the packs, you either get the Project 1124, or the PT-109, the Kennedy's torpedo boat that JFK was on. And if you purchase one of them, they're 30% off right now, you get into the CBT. So that's basically how you get in it. There's also various challenges and events you can do, but bloody hell, it's ridiculous. Basically, you need to be in the top 20 of players over the events, and that's never really going to happen. Top 5 every time. So, we'll get into ships. Now, when it comes to ships for me, ships is the least interested I have in the whole of World War II. Because it was it wasn't really a factor in the eastern side of the war. I should call it European. When we look at the European war, when it came to the Pacific, it made a massive difference. But I understood from a very long time ago when they talked about they wanted air, they wanted ground, they wanted ships, that a lot of the factors in the Pacific will not be taken into account. I'm not talking about the large ships or anything like that, but minute details which changed battles. Radar is a massive one. Reconnaissance is a massive one. Length of shot was a massive one. And overall, carriers were a massive reason why the Americans were able to batter the Japanese. It wasn't the fact that the Americans had better carriers, it was just there was minute details which made them slightly better. And that was never going to get taken into account. When we talk about ships, a lot of people were talking about, oh, wouldn't it be so cool to have carriers, destroyers, battleships, all the big fuckers, basically. All the big ships that you have, because everybody wants to go big or go home. It's why a lot of the favoured tanks of people are the Tiger IIs, are the IS-4s, or the T-10Ms, or basically some of the newer stuff which is just big. It's big fuckers, like the Chieftain. Even though the Chieftain's technically a medium tank, it's still a big tank compared to a lot in the game. I mean, for me personally, some of my favourite ones are the Cromwell. Even nowadays, the HVSS Sherman, I think, is actually really fun to do. The T-25 is one of my favourite tanks in game, and I know it shouldn't be, but it's pretty fun. But when it came to ships, whenever ships were talked about, people would talk about carriers, they would talk about destroyers, they would talk about battleships, they would talk about these big ships, and I knew for a fact they were never going to be in the game. Because one thing you must understand about carriers, first of all, when we look at carriers, the only way carriers are good is if you can have either AI planes coming off them, or you can have player-controlled planes coming off them, making them deadly. So if you had AI-controlled planes, we already know what the AI-controlled planes are like in War Thunder. To be quite honest, it's not very good. They can get... there's a reason why they took them out of realistic and simulator. Because they would lock onto one target at the start of a map, or maybe halfway through, and they would go and attack that target and make sure it died. They had unlimited fuel, they had unlimited ammo, and it was absolutely god-awful. And there was no way of stopping them. So what players would do in realistic is they would follow the AI aircraft, because eventually they would find an enemy player, and then you could have 2 aircraft on one, and he has to deal with an AI as well. Now the AIs were always piloted worse. It was just how it was. They turned a bit looser, they weren't as quick, but if you had slight damage, or if you had a fuel leak or something like that, then what would happen is the AI would chase you down and kill you because it has unlimited ammo. If you slightly hurt it, then it would struggle, it would have no idea what to do, and when they supposedly improved the AI, basically all they did is make their damage model a bit nicer to them. They gave them arcade flight models to the AI in realistic and simulator. Now, as a realistic pilot, and also a person who dabbles in simulator, AI ruined the game a lot of the time, because also it meant that the teams would be unbalanced sometimes. So when we talk about carriers, we have to take that into account. If somebody is piloting a carrier, and they're launching AI-controlled aircraft, first of all, that AI-controlled aircraft has to take off. Second of all, it has to hit targets. Maybe you decide what targets you hit. Can you imagine how overpowered that could be? But also, the AI in the game is terrible, so the AI would need a complete overhaul when it came to that for it to work even possibly. Now let's go to carriers and player vehicles. First of all, this could be amazingly overpowered. If you have a squad of people, let's say you have 3 planes and 1 carrier, and the planes are taking off from the carrier, this could be massively overpowered because of voice comms, because of working what to do, because of having a plan and everything like that. The carrier could go and hide somewhere, the planes could go bomb something, go back to the carrier, keep doing that over and over and over and over again. Or the carrier could get them into a perfect position, try and ram someone, then the planes can come up with rockets, torpedoes, bombs, whatever they want, and try and hit other people. So when we talk about carriers, it could have never happened. Because the only way you could do them is either making them stupidly overpowered, which would make the game incredibly boring and shit for most people so they'll never play it, or you make them incredibly bad, and then nobody would want to play the carriers anyway, right? That's the only way you could do it. Because the carrier is such a volatile thing, and AI is such a volatile thing in War Thunder, that it can go either way, so it's better just to say no, we're not going to do it. The same thing I kind of feel it's the same way I see ATGMs, where ATGMs are either going to be bang or bust, and eventually what will happen in the game is they will become bust, they will become useless, because otherwise the game would become incredibly tiresome and annoying for most people, and they'll just stop playing it at tier 5. So that's the carrier, the reason why they could never give somebody a carrier in-game. When we look at destroyers and battleships, looking at the larger side, a lot of people talk about the bloody Bismarck and shit like that. Well, even if we take the massive ships out, such as the Bismarck, and we leave you with the medium ones, so let's say a bunch of the Royal Navy ones, or a bunch of the American destroyers, what you have is still quite large ships with a hell of a lot of guns on them. Now, a lot of people talk about broadsides and how interesting they are and everything like that. Now, let's take it into context of War Thunder. When a lot of people talk about these pipe dreams, when they talk about destroyers being in the game, they always talk about how it would be fun to use them. What I like to do is try and think of if I'm on the receiving end. Something that I realized from a very, very long time ago in War Thunder is it is awful to try and see the game from your point of view. It is much better to see it when you're talking about it and when you're discussing about it from the other person's point of view who is either attacking you or defending you. So I remember this this was open in my mind when I started looking at the B-17, when it was broken. It was a very broken plane. And we didn't have a lot of the tools that we do nowadays to deal with it. You've got to remember, when I was playing British Tier 4s and the B-17 was smashing people on Hokkaido, we didn't have Griffin Spitz. We didn't have the Wyvern. We didn't have any of these. Basically, all you had was a Tempest, and if you didn't have the Tempest unlocked, you had the Spitfire Mark 9 to deal with the B-17, which you couldn't catch. You had less guns than, it was more accurate than you, and it could shoot you from any angle, and your damage model basically means if you get hit once, you got no engine, so good luck catching it. So it's always better to look from the other person's point of view, instead of just discussing your own and seeing, and basically going from there. So when we look at destroyers, if I was going from my own personal point of view, where I was playing as them, they would be so fun. You go around, you blast your guns, you reload, you blast your guns, maybe torpedoes and stuff like that. Yeah, you gotta dodge around, but that's fine. You can find an island somewhere to hide behind, you smash your guns, you try and loop them, try and hit stuff. Then I see it from the other point of view. So the other point of view, first of all, is look at mixed battles, which has not been confirmed with ships, but a lot of people are expecting ships to be there with at least planes, because that makes a lot of sense. With ground forces, it's a bit more dodgy. So, if I'm in a destroyer with a shit ton of guns on the side of it, or on the top looking at the sides, first of all, you cannot have ground forces against that. The ground forces will get chewed up. The only way you could solve it is if you reduced the impact of the guns on the ships. So, reduce the blast radius. Now, if you look at ground forces and what they've had to do with bombs in ground forces, they've reduced the impact of them, horizontally so much. So you literally have to land bombs on people, or right next to them, depending on how big the bomb is. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything. It's not fun to be a plane in ground forces, because you have to be as accurate as hell. And in your mind, if I'm playing realistic, that shouldn't have to be the case. If I even drop it, 100 meters away, it's going to do something. Depending on the bomb, 100 meters might be a bit too far. So with ships, you are lobbing shells at a shore, or you are lobbing shells into a war zone where you know ground forces are going to be. It's basically going to be the same as lobbing bombs, apart from they're going to go over a larger area. They're going to be not as accurate. Now, if we know anything from World War II, when it came to ship combat and ground combat, the ship combats became very much more of artillery strikes on the beaches. You look at how the Americans dealt with it in the Pacific, and you look at the one that always stands out is Normandy, without talking really about anything else. If you look at Normandy and you look at how the ships were used, it was mainly barraging, trying to smash the landscape apart before the troops got there. Now, this is a really key point. Before the troops got there. So, if the bombardment was going on while the troops were landing, can you imagine what may have happened to those troops? Let's just say the bombardment is just slightly off. All those troops are dead. It nearly happened, to be quite honest. Go and look it up. When you look at where some of the shells landed, compared to where they were supposed to land, it could have very easily, the invasion force could have been at least hit by some of this barrage. But it happened beforehand. Just beforehand. So, if you have in War Thunder these barrages happening on beaches, on land, where the ground forces are, first of all, you're going to team kill stuff. It's as simple as that, because the ground forces are already there. If you're trying to shoot preemptively, then, it's not going to work, because your forces are going to be there. If you're going to shoot at their respawn point, then that completely breaks ground forces, because you're under constant fire from the ships. Now, someone may say, what happens when the ships are going to be attacking the ships, and the ground forces are going to be attacking the ground forces. It's not going to happen that often. Well, there's going to be one asshole in a destroyer or a battleship, in a big ship with a lot of guns, who is not going to care about the ship battle, and all he's going to do is lay volley after volley onto your ground forces map. So the only way of solving this is either to make sure that ground forces do not fight ships, or that ships are so far away from the battle you can't, you can't influence each other. Which basically means that it wouldn't be a mixed battle anyway. Why would you need to be in a ship? If you wanted to attack the shore, you wouldn't be able to. So you might as well just have two separate battles anyway, unless you want somebody to respawn in a ship, die, and then respawn on the ground. That's the only way you can do it. The two maps cannot impact each other, because it is so heavily one-sided. At least in tanks, you have the ability to shoot down planes. What is a tank gonna do against a massive destroyer or battleship? What's it gonna do? Maybe land a shell on it? May knock out a gun. He's gonna have 8 to 12 guns firing at you. It's not really a fair fight, and it won't ever work. I mean, that's one of the big reasons why destroyers and battleships won't be in the game. Another thing that I haven't even mentioned is how much AA these ships have on them. You've played War Thunder. The AI destroyers in the game, right? You know how many guns they have on them when it comes to trying to drop a torpedo or drop bombs on them if you're at low altitude. It's crazy. It's crazy the amount of guns they have. And it's not as if it's unrealistic or anything, it's just how it is, and the AI in War Thunder is incredibly accurate. But do you know what is more accurate than the AI? The player. The player is much more accurate. So if you have these big ships with a ton of AA guns on them, how is an aircraft going to survive against that? The simple answer is, it is not. It is going to get torn apart. You won't even get near it. You'd have to high altitude bomb. Now on to the next point. If you high altitude bomb, it will be incredibly boring for the person in the aircraft. And why is this? We all know that bombs have had a reduced damage radius, so you basically have to be more accurate. So therefore at higher altitudes it's going to be harder for you to hit stuff. Also, on top of that, without even thinking, I want you now to go into a match, or go into a custom or single battle. Drop a bomb right next to a battleship or destroyer, and see what it does. Because it won't do a lot, if anything. If you're using the 4,000 pounder maybe, or if you're using some of the big B-18 bombs, or some of the big B-29 bombs, yeah, you might get a hit. But to actually kill a battleship, you have to hit it. You have to hit it, not dead on, but, you have to be able to hit the physical part of the battleship. So if you land a bomb next to the battleship, it won't do anything. So you're already at a disadvantage against the ships, and then the ships, as I said, they already have AA. And they already have the big guns, so if they feel like it, they'll just shoot a barrage at you, or at least try to. So, even from a year ago when people were talking about ships, I said, no, you can't have these big ships in the game. It won't work if you're trying to mix it with aircraft, if you're trying to mix it with tanks, and even if you're trying to mix it with with other smaller vehicles. You've also got to take into account some nations didn't have certain types of ships. And a lot of people will say, well, why would you hamper other nations because of this? Because then, nobody will play that nation which didn't have them. It's as simple as that, and you need a balance in nations. But anyway, so that's the whole reason why you won't see bigger ships. You will see much smaller ships. Like the ones that they've shown at Gamescom, they've all been relatively small. I mean, they still have decent guns on them. I wouldn't call the guns that good. I would call them very much AA in a way, depending on how high they aim. Like you have the Type 11 PT-15, which is the Japanese boat. It has 4 torpedoes on it, and it goes pretty fast, like 70 kilometers an hour. And it also has, I believe, 2 40s, which I think will still damage ships, but also they're going to be pretty good AA. Even just 2 40s. 2 40s will be good enough. And then we have the Project 183 Bolshevik torpedo boat. So this is the German one that they have shown. It seems to be a 1950s boat, so I'm guessing it won't be tier 1, or at least I'd hope not, because of the guns on it. It has two twin 25mm 2M3 cannons, so it has four 25mm. Now if those things can point upwards, good luck to your planes, if this is a low tier. It can also go at 80 kilometers an hour. It also has two torpedo tubes, so yeah, that's going to be fun. And then you've got the Fairmill D motor torpedo boat, which is the British one they've shown. All links will be in the description if you want to have a look at them, but right now they're all on the front page of the War Thunder website. So this one is a bit better for you. It only has one automatic Boffer, the 40mm 2-pounder. It has two 20mm Oerlikons on the stern and two twin high-caliber 50 Vickers Mark III machine guns and two twin rifle caliber .303 Vickers No. 5 Mark I machine guns. So this thing, once again, it has a lot of guns, and it also has depth charges, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But it doesn't have torpedoes, so this thing is going to be a batter, try and just smash enemy ships with its guns. But also, you're not getting near that with an aircraft. It's got a 40. It's got two 20s. What are you going to do? You're going to skim the water to try and get your torpedo off? Well, this thing, it has 5,000 horsepower. It can go at 32 knots, which is just a little bit less than 60 kilometers an hour. By the time you dropped your torpedo, this guy can just swivel around and shoot you. You'll also be going slower because you're dropping a torpedo. Let's say you high altitude bomb this thing so it can't shoot you. If this thing is moving, which they should be, like basically in War Thunder, they're trying to go for these small, nimble ships so they move around. They're trying to be a bit quicker. It's going to be impossible to hit these things from high altitude because they're small and they're fast. Even just turning, and we've also talked about the reduced bomb radius. Anyway, for the Russians, we have somewhat bigger. We have the Project 1124. It has a T-34 turret on it with the 76, so have fun against that. It's also got Katyushkas, or Katushkas. I normally say Katushkas. So, with this one, it's kind of interesting. It's got two TB3 engines in it, which I always found pretty cool. It also has two more guns on it. I believe they're 20s? Oh no, they're 12.7s. So the 12.7s, this is probably a one which, if you're looking for bombing, this is probably the easiest one to do. It's only got two 12.7s on the top of it. It's got a T-34 turret on it, so that's going to be fun to fight against in other ships. And also the Katushkas. So yeah, that's still packed to the brim, but at least at least aircraft can attack it. And then you got the JFK boats, the PT-109. It's got a few guns on it, not too much, but it is amazingly quick, which is something that should never be underestimated. It also is not very big, so hitting it is always going to be hard to do. Let's see, she has four 21-inch Mark 18-1 torpedo tubes, two twin high-caliber 50 Browning machine guns in rotating turrets, and an automatic 20mm Oerlikon cannon in the stern, with a 12-man crew and a maximum speed of 75 kilometers an hour or 41 knots. You're not going to hit this thing with an aircraft. It's incredibly fast. It has an Oerlikon on the back. And it should, well, I'm not sure. There's been a debate, especially on the War Thunder Reddit, about whether this thing should have a 37, I believe it is, or a 45. I believe it's a 37 on the front of it, because it was a field modification. I don't think it'll make that much of a difference. The only thing it'll make a difference against is fighting other ships. It won't really do a lot for AA, and from my understanding, it wasn't really on the ship for very long. Like, basically, it got put on and then the ship got sunk. I might be completely wrong about that, please correct me, but it seems kind of facetious to put it on just because it was on for such a small amount of time. Then you can basically just say why tons of different field modifications should be put on aircraft and tanks, and you know, you can't just pick and choose the ones that you want. You either have to have them all or none. So, all of these ships have a lot in common. They are very quick, Well, at least compared to ships, anyway. They're very quick, they're quite nimble, most of them have torpedoes apart from the British one, but the British one makes up for it for having more guns. Also, they are extremely good at taking out aircraft. And, apart from the Russian one, and none of them really have a lot of pushing power when it comes to killing tanks. Now, I think this is a conscious decision. As I talked about before, with destroyers and battleships and landing craft, they just shit on tanks. There's no debate here. Ships will destroy and disintegrate tanks, just like aircraft destroy and disintegrate tanks. Does that mean tanks do not have a part in the game? No, of course not. They are very fun to play, and they should. It's my second favourite mode after aircraft. So, you've got to do something to try and help out the tanks, and the way you do that is by reducing ships, and also to help out aircraft, you reduce ships, as I've talked about before. The bigger ships do not fit the game. They cannot fit the game because then ships would dominate. It's the same reason why. It's the same reason why they don't go by. They don't sit BR by historical standards, because then you would have KV-1s versus Panzer IIs. You would also have to work out when you would put the machine, which variant would you use, what time would they be out, and there would always be issues with this. There would be massive issues with this. You would have Tigers against T-34s, T-34 L11s. It wouldn't be very fun, and it's and the idea is always coming from the side which will benefit from it. But it is not a good system. It really isn't. But anyway, going back to the ships. So they've obviously made a conscious effort to not put any massive guns on the ships. The only one which has a massive gun on it is the Project 1124. It has the T-34 turret, as talked about before, with the 76. Now the 76 has pretty low velocity. Let's just have a look in the game right now. It's, let's just go here. I don't believe it's on the first T-34, but it looks very similar to it. Let's see. Sorry, I'm not feeling great. It's very warm here. It looks like the F-34 turret. I don't think it's the STZ, but it doesn't matter. They have the same gun. It might be. So let's look at the F-34 turret, which is on the T-34 1941 and the T-34E STZ. If we're looking at the rounds, first of all, they have shrapnel rounds. That may be kind of interesting. And then HE rounds, which may be interesting as well. And then it's got the AP-HE BC, which is basically the round that most people use. The mid-8 fuse one. The BR-38 350, B. So that has a muzzle velocity of 680 meters per second. It's not very high. So even with that gun, you're generally not going to be firing onto the shore unless you're very, very good at looping shots, because I'm guessing they're not going to be within a kilometer of the shore. It doesn't make sense for that to be like that, just because of how they're setting it up. But if you look at all of the other aircraft, the Katushkas, since we have no idea how they're going to perform in the game, and I haven't seen them in the War Thunder stream, personally, I mean, they may have been out there. It would be nice to see a video if anybody has one. It's going to be interesting how they end up, because, well, I've had a lot of run-ins with Calliopes, I'll just say that. But anyway, small guns, torpedoes. These ships are designed to kill other ships. They are designed to fight each other. They are not designed to attack ground forces, really. They're not really designed to attack aircraft. The aircraft thing is like a secondary factor. They can be very good against aircraft, but you can understand their main idea is to attack ships. The only one which may not be true with this is the British one. The Fairmile D, motorboat. The Fairmile doesn't have any torpedoes, which is, you know, it's kind of mind-boggling, because the other ones do, apart from the Russian one, which has the Katushkas and the turret on it, which, you know, would be designed to destroy ships. Now, looking at the War Thunder stream, something that seems to be kind of there or present is that you have more crew than you need, and I think this is good because it means that you can easily replace people on ships. It means that they're going to last longer. They've also talked about the fact that if you hit people below the hull, eventually, you know, you will sink. You won't just stay above the water and just sustain damage. I think that's really good. One thing that I'm missing, though, is realistic and simulator battles. I haven't seen anything from that. I've just seen arcade, and I want to know how realistic works here. Because, for me personally, I play a bit of arcade tanks, but that's really about it. I don't really play arcade planes unless it's for challenges and stuff like that. So, when it comes down to the game, I am always looking at that realistic and simulator way. First of all, with simulator, I'm guessing what they're going to do is they're going to have a camera on top of the commander's, I can't remember what you call it, like the cabin, basically, where the commander is. Just like they do in tanks. And maybe later on, you know, with VR or with basically how planes work, where you have cockpits and stuff, and you know, you have a room with all the bits and bobs in. Oh, can you imagine? Oh, that'll be so good. And with tanks, I'm waiting for that, right? I'm guessing when ships are done, then I hope they move on to stuff like that. Even though it's going to be really hard to model, it will change the game. Where in simulator, you know, you're actually in the tank and you can like move around through the people. If one guy gets knocked out, you're given someone else, and you can slightly automatically do stuff. Like if you're in the gunner's seat, maybe you can drive as well, just because otherwise it would be awkward. But you know, or maybe have multiple people in a tank. Like the best example I would talk about when it comes to that is Heroes of Stalingrad, I believe it was called. No, sorry, what am I on about? Red Orchestra. Red Orchestra 2 did this really well. So it'd be nice if they just move over that system, and then maybe integrate it into ships. But we'll see if they do it. I mean, we're gonna first of all have to see more of these ships, because I feel like a lot of these are low tier ones, and if they're not, if they're over the tiers, then it's going to be interesting how they go, because I'm worried that at the high tiers in ships, they're going to just throw in not massive ships, but ships which are small and have a lot of guns on them. Like we already see it with the Project 1124. It's got a lot of guns on it. The British one as well. It's got a lot of guns. And the Project 1124 can do a hell of a lot of damage. I mean, yeah, it doesn't have torpedoes, so it may not be very good against other ships. But depending on the Katushkas, and also with the T-34 turret, it could do a lot of damage to other things. And also with the 12-7s won't really do a lot. But we're going to have to see some of these bigger ships. Now we know that every nation is going to be in CBT. I am really happy about this. I think this is how it should be. You should start off with a few from from each nation. That makes sense to me. Whereas in ground forces, you just started with Russian and German. And then they added in American, and now we have a very bare-bone British tree. So I would rather them just start with every nation, even if it's just one or two ships. It makes more sense to me. It means that you can start doing each of the trees. Whereas now we're in a situation where in tanks, in ground forces, where's the Japanese tree? I thought, because last year they talked about the American tree, I believe it was. Maybe it was the British tree. Around this time, in August, I believe it was the Americans. I believe they were talking about American tanks and the CBT for the American tanks. Where the hell are the Japanese tanks? I mean, you're showing ships, and ships are always cool and everything. But does that mean that Japanese tanks are on the back burner? I've talked about before how I think Japanese tanks, they're going to have to take a different approach compared to other trees. They're going to have to try and limit them to maybe tier 3 or something. Because, to be quite honest, the only tier 4 or tier 5 Japanese tanks you could have is in the regards of giving Japanese tanks like Lend-Lease stuff from other nations, which I don't think is good, or copying the template of other tanks, such as the Elephant, which they tried to do, and also the Tiger II, which they also tried to do. But just making worse versions. It's going to be interesting with Japanese tanks. I really hope we get Japanese tanks. I don't want it to become something like the French tech tree, which we haven't even heard a word about, or the Italian tech tree. I'm a firm believer in finishing something before you start something else. Now, in the case of War Thunder, that may be very hard to do, but when tanks were introduced, I believe a lot of the core gameplay of the aircraft had been sorted out. You had a lot of planes, you had a lot of game modes, and they've added stuff going on, but you could see there was some semblance of finishing aircraft. And all they basically had to do was print new ones, create new maps, but all the new maps they've done, they've basically just taken them out, or they've built them with an eye towards tank maps. So they've built a tank map and then they've pushed out a landscape around it, or they've done it the other way around, where they've just taken a piece of land and then built a small tank map inside of it. So you can see where that crosses over, which is good. But you can't have ships without the Japanese tech tree. It seems completely baffling to me that you are taking out a fifth of the game just for ships, and we've had nothing on Japanese tanks. I can't find a single answer on when Japanese tanks are coming. And silence is never good from a company like Gaijin, because at least with their PR answers, right? At least with their PR answers, they give you something. But when you ask a question, and they say something very dodgy, basically dodging the question, as a lot of the time they do, you just look at it and you think, what's going on here? And since we have heard nothing about Japanese tanks, even in the Q&As, I couldn't find anything. Maybe next time we have a Q&A, Japanese tanks might be a good idea. Everybody is just hyped about ships. And I understand, it's a new part of the game. But for me personally, it is the part of the game which I'm least excited about, because I'll probably go into it in another video. Just the whole mechanics of it seem incredibly boring to me. But it all depends on map design. It all depends on how they do maps. If they do them unrealistically, then it may be quite fun. But if they do it realistically, it's going to be very, very, very boring. And also it depends on how much damage torpedoes do. Like, are we talking about one-shot torpedoes, or are we talking about, oh, you know, it's hit my hull and not really done anything? For me, it has to be one-shot torpedoes, just because to be at least a little bit realistic. If one of these smaller ships gets hit by a torpedo, it should just evaporate. When we look at larger ships getting hit by torpedoes, they also evaporate. Looking at the torpedoes that have been shown in the game. But, you know, it's nice to see ships. But for me, the main criticism is, where are the Japanese tanks? Where are they? Please let me know. Because without them, you haven't completed ground forces. And we know for a fact that these ships are coming out at the end of the year. So, are you just not going to care about tanks, care about Japanese tanks? Even when you have maps which are literally designed for Japanese tanks in the game, on like jungle and stuff like that. You know, no British tank ever fought in a place like that. It's insane. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. In the few days coming, we'll have a look at the KV-220 and the F7, F3. But the overall conclusion on ships is I need to see more. I need to see gameplay realistic. I haven't seen any yet. Only arcade, and it seems alright. But when you add in ground forces will get smashed. When you add in aircraft should also get smashed unless they change something. I hope you have a lovely day, and well, I'll see you next time.